No warning, no robbery, just a cold, deliberate execution outside a Texas courtroom. When 2 additional victims were discovered months later, detectives recognized it was not a one-time incident, but rather the start of a larger, darker pattern. It began with 5 gunshots in broad daylight. A typical Thursday morning in Kaufman County quickly became something out of a criminal novel. Assistant District Attorney Mark Hasse had just gotten out of his vehicle and was headed toward the courtroom, like he normally did. However, this time, someone was waiting for him. The guy, dressed in all black and with his face concealed, approached calmly, spoke a few words, and then fired the trigger. Without hesitation. Don't panic. Simply cold, premeditated murder. Mark was struck numerous times. Witnesses heard the last gunfire ricochet off the street, which ended it all. A gunshot struck the side of his skull. He slumped in a pool of blood, only feet from justice. He never made it into the courtroom. And who did the shooting? Vanished. This was neither a frenzied drive-by or a street battle gone bad. This was an execution. During the middle of the day, feet from the courthouse. The murderer didn't even leave any shot casings. Witnesses were unable to capture the license plate since there was none. Even the getaway automobile, a light gray or silver sedan, was well cleaned. Whoever did this was well aware of their actions. Mark Hasse was not just any prosecutor. He went for the worst of the worst, including Aryan Brotherhood members, drug smugglers, and gang bosses. He manufactured enemies for a livelihood. That morning, one of those adversaries got even. He was noted for his intelligence, tenacity, and fearlessness in court. But outside of the courtroom, he had a silly side. He wore colorful, outrageous sweaters merely to make colleagues laugh. He was respected, adored, and fiercely devoted. Mark's whole existence revolved on putting dangerous individuals behind bars. And now someone had stepped out of the shadows and reversed the script, laying him down in the most public and violent manner conceivable. There was shouting before the rounds were fired. One witness said that Mark continued yelling, "I'm sorry. I apologize," repeated many times. Another saw what seemed to be a short struggle before the bullets. But none saw it coming, and no one could understand why Mark, who was always prepared with a rifle, didn't stand a chance. His weapon was under his coat. He didn't even reach for it. This is only one tale. There are many more. Subscribe to avoid missing out on what happens next. This was not simply murder. It was a message. A hit that seemed like it came from a cartel or an organized criminal organization, not small-town Texas. The kind of crime that makes everyone peek over their shoulders. And the terror that followed? It did not end with Mark's death. Because if someone could kill a prosecutor in broad daylight, outside the courtroom, who else was on the target list? Mark had a large caseload, including violent criminals and individuals who despised him. Investigators were concerned about more than simply who he prosecuted. It was how things were done. Quiet, quick, clean, professional. And it was done with the assurance of someone who knew he would never be caught. As investigators attempted to put together the murder scene, one thing became clear: this wasn't over. Just as the community began to breathe again, the nightmare returned, twice as horrific. 2 months after Mark Hasse was killed down outside the courtroom, District Attorney Mike McClelland and his wife Cynthia were discovered murdered in their home. Not in the roadway, not in public, inside their shelter. Mike was shot 16 times, and Cynthia 4 times. This wasn't just a warning. It was a declaration. Mike wasn't just Mark's supervisor. He was his mentor, his good pal. And now he and his wife were vanished, ambushed in what should have been their safest location. Their family had planned an Easter weekend together. Cynthia had been baking. There was food on the table. When loved ones couldn't get an answer, they searched the house and stepped right into violence. There was no evidence of forcible entry, which created the most unsettling question of all. Did Mike know his murderer? Did he open the door, thinking he was secure, only to be deceived by someone he trusted? Even more terrifying, the murderer had only been there for 2 minutes. It just takes 2 minutes to kill 2 lives. To enter, perform, and then vanish. That's how quickly it occurred. Surveillance cameras captured a white automobile driving through the area around the time of the incident. Not the exact vehicle seen when Mark was murdered, but close. The same faint color, same exact time. This time, the murderer made a mistake. They left shell casings. They left footage. And they left the neighborhood in total dread. This was no coincidence. It was a pattern. Prosecutors were being picked out one by one, systematically. This was a war, and someone had proclaimed it. However, what transpired next transformed this situation from frightening, straight up twisted. It wasn't long before the rumors began, and they were dark. With 2 prosecutors killed in cold blood, detectives instantly shifted their attention to the most dangerous persons Mark and Mike had ever encountered. These were not low-level offenders. These were aggressive, organized, and tightly knit organizations. People with power, money, and a lengthy history of grievances. The Aryan Brotherhood was at the top of the list, a violent white supremacist group with a history of anti-police sentiment. Just months before, nearly 30 of their members had been indicted, and Kaufman County played a significant role in that. It wasn't unreasonable to believe this was a full-fledged counterattack. However, they were not the only ones on the radar. Mexican drug traffickers have a history with Mike and Mark, and if anybody knows how to deliver a message via violence, it's them. Both guys have worked on cases involving big narcotics operations, including meth laboratories, trafficking networks, and cartel-connected dealers. That type of effort does not go away lightly, especially not when convictions are handed down. So when the DA and his wife were discovered slain down in their sitting room, everyone began murmuring the same thing. This is cartel all over it. Cold, fast, professional, as if a blow had been ordered from afar and was executed without hesitation. News of the killings circulated quickly, and terror grew even quicker. Officials called the FBI. The local police force was strained thin. Even the governor's office was becoming engaged. If this was gang-related, Kaufman County was on the verge of a major disaster. It didn't help that the murders were almost too polished, like something only skilled, brutal criminals could carry off. But it was hardly the whole tale, because, while everyone was focused on gangs and cartels, the actual murderer was observing, and he was closer than anybody knew. While the world looked for gang affiliations and cartel connections, the true monster was hidden in plain sight. Eric Williams was not a dark criminal lurking in another nation. He was a former justice of the peace, a guy who previously shook hands with the prosecutors he would later pursue. And why did he fall from grace? 3 stolen computer displays. That is it. It seemed small, even comical, until you learn how far Eric was ready to go simply to get even. Mark Hasse had prosecuted him. Mike McClelland had endorsed the lawsuit. They deprived Eric of his job, legal license, and reputation. But instead of going away with a slap on the wrist, only probation, Eric allowed it to fester. He was not happy with vengeance in court. He wanted it in blood. When Mark was slain, Mike personally mentioned Eric Williams as someone to look into. However, when police arrived, they discovered him wearing a sling and pretending to be wounded. There is no gunshot residue, no evidence, so they let him go. That was their first error. What about behind the scenes? Eric was already weaving his strategy, like a spider creating a web. Investigators eventually discovered his online activity, which included searches for car plates, home locations, and even surveillance on the now-deceased individuals. He wasn't just fascinated, he stalked them like prey. What's worse, Eric had the audacity to pretend astonished when the killings occurred. He conducted interviews. I expressed my sympathies. He said his heart went out to the victims' families. But that's how he played it, suave, manipulative, and controlled. Like a guy who thought he was 10 steps ahead of everyone. For a time, he was. However, detectives discovered flaws in his claim of innocence. When detectives opened Eric Williams' storage container, they were unprepared for what they found inside. It wasn't just suspicious, it was scary. Inside, cops discovered a fully stocked armory. Guns, ammunition, bulletproof vests, fake badges. Uniforms are military style, but it was just the beginning. The getaway vehicle, the same white sedan spotted driving around the McClelland's house around the time of the killings, was parked at the rear, hidden under boxes and gear. Its plates were phony. The seats were scrubbed clean. Inside the trunk, additional guns were packed, ready to use. Then came the most terrifying discovery of all, a pickle jar filled with a handmade explosive combination called napalm. Not only do weapons and bullets exist, but also explosives. This is something you would only hear about in conflict zones or terrorist schemes. This was not a guy thinking sensibly. This was a full-fledged vengeance fantasy made with steel and explosives. However, the physical evidence was not the only factor that determined his destiny. On Eric's PC, police discovered an avalanche of digital breadcrumbs. The search history screamed of premeditation. He looked up Mark and Mike's everyday routines. He planned out their neighborhoods. He also traced the license plates of not just his targets, but also their neighbors. He needed to know who was coming, who was watching, and how to depart without leaving a trace. These were not casual clicks. This was surgical stalking. There was also a handwritten message that utilized the same language as the anonymous emails delivered to law enforcement. The identical emails had taunted police, asking that a judge step down or more blood would be spilled. He was familiar with the specifics of the killings. He referred to ammunition kinds and entrance sites that no one else knew. Police were suddenly dealing with a serious problem, not only a murderer, but a manipulator, an individual who wanted to influence the inquiry from the shadows. Even the receipts revealed a narrative. One led them to a white automobile acquired under the name Richard Green, a fictitious identity linked to Eric. Another disclosed the procurement of certain weapons and tactical equipment. It was like a paper trail that he believed he could hide, but it kept leading back to him. Despite all of this, Eric maintained his innocence. He just cooperated enough to delay, conducted interviews. They pretended to be shocked, sounded like a concerned citizen. But beyond his cool demeanor, he was disintegrating. The reality was becoming too loud to ignore. That's when someone else stepped forward, someone who had been at his side the whole time. Her confession altered everything. The killer's accomplice was neither a hired gun or criminal mastermind. This was his wife, Kim Williams, who was quiet and introverted and was best known for her health concerns and her tendency to remain at home, crumbled under strain. During questioning, she absolutely broke down. Tears led to admissions, and what she disclosed surprised even the detectives seated across from her. She wasn't just a witness. She was the getaway driver, the planner, the backup. She confessed to being involved in all 3 killings. Mark Hasse, Mike McClelland, Cynthia McClelland. Every life taken was part of a well-planned strategy that she assisted in carrying out. Why? Because she was equally outraged, just as bitter, just as twisted. She informed investigators that Eric had been plotting retribution for months, ever after his sentence for stealing computer displays. In her own words, he couldn't let go. He thought Mark and Mike had wrecked his life, and he wanted everyone involved to suffer. Kim, she agreed. She despised them, too. She thought her husband had been humiliated, and she was eager to assist him in retaliation. Her details were flawlessly aligned. She explained how Eric posed as a SWAT officer to mislead Mike McClelland into opening the door. He said there was an active shooter in the vicinity, and Mike, feeling he was safe, let his murderer stroll right in. He and Cynthia died seconds afterward. Kim sat outside in the vehicle the whole time, high on a mixture of painkillers and sedatives, drifting asleep between bouts of adrenaline. She acknowledged to taking OxyContin, Valium, and morphine on a regular basis. She said that the medicines made it easy to comply with the strategy. They lessened her guilt. She numbed her thoughts. In her words, "I was so drugged up I couldn't think straight." But that didn't stop her from driving the vehicle, assisting with the cleaning, and witnessing the people they despised die. Kim also stated why Eric was wearing a mesh mask during Mark Hasse's murder. He didn't just wish to hide. He wanted Mark to know who was coming to take his life. That is why he left it slightly see-through. A last, twisted face-to-face encounter before squeezing the trigger. She even sent detectives to Lake Tawakoni, stating Eric had discarded more guns and gear in the lake. Police found a backpack containing firearms, ammunition, and the same mesh mask he used during the first homicide. This was hardly a crime of passion. It was cold-blooded, premeditated, and motivated by entitlement. Eric didn't simply want vengeance. He wanted the world to fear him. Kim assisted him every step of the way. But this time, her commitment came at a cost. Her statement regarding Eric's next target escalated the situation. Eric Williams did not break into the McClelland's house. He was invited in. Eric, according to Kim, was clothed from head to toe in SWAT gear. Uniform, gear, badge. He understood just how to play the part. And, in the midst of an active investigation, in which prosecutors were already being murdered, that disguise was the ideal weapon. He knocked on the McClelland's door, saying it was an emergency. They said there was a shooter in the area, said they were in danger. Mike, who was already fearful, believed him. He trusted the outfit. He believed assistance had come. What stepped through the door, however, was death, not aid. Eric took out an AR-15 and unleashed pandemonium moments after being welcomed inside. Mike was fatally shot in the foyer. Cynthia, just a few feet away in the living room, had no chance. She was shot many times. It was horrible, fast, merciless. 2 lives were lost in less than 2 minutes. There was no forceful entrance. There's no struggle, just pure manipulation. Eric understood just how to utilize fear as a key. He knew how people think, how they worry, and how to use this into an advantage. That wasn't simply wicked, it was planned. And, as he played hero at the front door, his wife Kim waited outside in the vehicle, high on medications, waiting for her husband to complete what they both knew was about to happen. She did not call for aid. She did not stop him. She simply drove. But what happened next revealed that Mike and Cynthia were not the ultimate targets. Because Eric wasn't done, not even close. He believed he was too brilliant to be caught. but the jury disagreed. Eric Williams was tried individually for all of the killings, beginning with Cynthia McClelland. Prosecutors did not require his DNA. They did not require fingerprints. What they possessed was even more powerful: a mound of circumstantial evidence and the voice of someone who had been at his side throughout, his own wife. Kim Williams took the stand and did not hold back. She took the jurors through every twisted detail of how Eric plotted the killings, negotiated his way into houses, and fired the bullet without hesitation. Her confession made it evident that this was not a guy acting in the heat of the moment. This guy chose murder, step by step, bullet by bullet. Eric's defense attempted to dismiss it as coincidence, said the emails might have been composed by anybody. Kim said that he was just furious and seeking vengeance. But the jurors didn't believe it, not for 1 second, because every detail of this story, every weapon, search, and disguise, pointed directly back to him. The mask, the car, storage unit, a digital footprint. It was the perfect storm of evidence. And the ultimate blow? Eric sat in court, smirking, smug, arrogant, as if he still felt he had control. But the jurors saw through it. After just 2 hours of deliberation, the decision was returned: guilty of capital murder. When it came time for punishment, prosecutors sought one thing: death. And Kim Williams was the last nail. She informed the court just what kind of guy her husband was: cold, calculated, dangerous. Her words sounded like gunshots. When the sentence was read out, there was no shock or tears, only stillness. Eric Williams was sentenced to death row, but that was not the end of his narrative. Even from his jail cell, he continued to attempt to fight his way back into the limelight. Kim Williams planned 3 murders, but evaded the death sentence. Kim reached an agreement with prosecutors after exposing all of the details of her husband's scheme. In return for her complete assistance, she agreed to a plea bargain: 40 years in jail with the possibility of release in 2034. That implies that if she behaves, she might be released in less than 2 decades after helping to end 3 lives. She did not get this bargain because she merited compassion. She earned it because she was helpful. Her evidence showed the jurors just what Eric was capable of. But let's be clear, Kim was not an innocent bystander. She drove the automobile. She was aware of the strategy. She also acknowledged to wanting retribution. What are her excuses? A swirl of medications, shaky judgment, and allegiance to an angry guy with a grudge. But her own remarks confirmed the truth. She was glad it occurred. Hearing the gunfire, she felt that justice had been done, not by the system, but by them. After being sentenced, she petitioned for divorce. It's as if it wiped everything, as if severing connections with Eric Williams would erase all she had done to heal him. While Eric is on death row, Kim is confined to a jail cell, away from public view. But don't forget, she was equally dangerous, just as accountable. And if not for her confession, the court system would never have caught up with either of them. Even with her behind bars, one question remains: what if she walks free someday? He could have gotten away with a slap on the wrist, but he chose murder. Eric Williams was not facing decades in prison. He wasn't being dragged in the dirt. He was convicted of stealing 3 computer displays, a minor, humiliating error that lost him his job and legal license. That is it. There is no jail time, just probation. But what about the injured ego? It escalated into fury, and that fury escalated into a cold, calculating, murdering spree. Instead of restoring his life, Eric destroyed it completely. He may have accepted the penalty and gone on. I found a new career, proved everyone incorrect, but instead, he became obsessed with vengeance. And how did he respond to humiliation? 3 dead corpses, a reputable prosecutor, a district attorney. An innocent woman is caught in the crossfire. He ruined families, wrecked communities, and pulled his own wife into the chaos. All because he couldn't deal with the repercussions of his own decisions. So what did it get him? A cell on death row, a courtroom packed with people who wanted him eliminated, and a legacy that can now be described in one word: coward. Not only for what he did, but for why he did it. He was not battling injustice. He was not making a point. He was merely a guy who couldn't accept responsibility for being caught. Now he spends his days behind bars, submitting appeal after appeal, pleading with the same court system he attempted to dismantle to rescue him. The courtroom where he once stood with strength and dignity now bears the key to his destiny. Eric Williams didn't just lose his freedom. He lost everything, and all for something he might have left with a shred of dignity. Eric Williams sought dominance, respect, and vengeance. However, in the end, all he received was a jail uniform and a legacy of ruin. His victims were those who advocated for justice. He couldn't defeat them in court, so he attempted to quiet them with gunfire. And now he'll spend the rest of his life waiting for the justice he desperately sought to avoid. Let this case serve as a warning that one man's resentment may lead to grief for another family. With that stated, thank you for watching. And if tales like these leave you speechless, be sure to subscribe for more true crime that goes beyond the headlines. Subscribe to stay up to date on news that the mainstream media may overlook. Until next time.